Chapter 3 of Winning His Way by a Self-Made Man. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Chapter 3, in which Frank assumes control of the Green River Argus. Squire Roach nodded superciliously at Frank as he passed out of the office, but the boy acknowledged it with his usual politeness. "Why, hello, Master Morris," said Mr. Jebb effusively. "Haven't kept you waiting, have I?" "No, sir," answered Frank quietly. "How long have you been here?" continued the manager and editor a bit anxiously. "Not very long," replied the boy, looking Mr. Jebb in the eye in a way which somewhat discomposed that shrewd individual. "I'm glad to hear it," said Mr. Jebb with a feeling of relief, and he took the other chair, while Robinson disappeared into the composing room, where he lighted another cigarette and began to jolly the female compositors. His appearance there didn't seem to worry Billings in the least, for he continued his conversation with Gibson just the same, which showed that the foreman felt certain of his job under Mr. Jebb and his associate Robinson. Evidently it was high time some change for the better should be made if the plant was to be kept out of the sheriff's hands. "Did your mother send you with a message to me?" continued Mr. Jebb, eyeing the boy keenly. "Or perhaps you have brought the money to pay off the force?" "Yes, Mr. Jebb, I have brought the money to pay off the employees of this paper." "All right," said the manager briskly. "I'll take it," and he stretched out his hands expectantly. "As my mother has turned the management of the Argus over to me, beginning with today, I will pay off myself." "Turn the management over to you?" gasped Mr. Jebb, as if he couldn't believe the evidence of his own ears. "Yes, sir," said Frank with the greatest composure. "Let me say it is quite time something was done to save the Argus from going to smash." "Young man," said Mr. Jebb with an assumption of injured dignity, "are you aware that your remarks might be construed by me as an insult? I was hired by your father to manage and edit this newspaper, and I flatter myself, from a long career as a journalist, that I understand my business." "I will not question your ability, Mr. Jebb," said the boy calmly, "but I do question your loyalty to my dead father and his family." "What do you mean?" asked Mr. Jebb, clearly startled. "I mean that you have not worked in our interests, that you have betrayed the trust we reposed in you. In other words, I accuse you of having sold yourself to Squire Roach, and in order to accomplish his plan of freezing my mother out of the Argus, you have desperately conspired to partially ruin the paper, and you have practically succeeded." "Young man, you are dreaming," sneered Mr. Jebb with a guilty flush on his face. "Will you explain why you discharged Dan Harwood, who satisfactorily filled the duties of foreman and local reporter for my father?" asked Frank firmly. "I don't see that you have a right to question any of my official acts," replied Mr. Jebb aggressively. "I have just told you that the Argus has passed into my control. Therefore, I have a right to inquire into any matter which does not strike me as the right thing." "I do not recognize your authority, Frank Morris. If your mother will come here herself and tell me that she has turned the paper over to you, why, here is her written order to that effect. Do you question that?" And the boy flashed his authority under Mr. Jebb's eyes. "Do I understand that your mother has reconsidered her plan of selling this paper to Squire Roach, who has made her an offer for it?" "The Argus is not for sale at present. As you seem to have taken charge here, I presume you expect me to run the paper for you. Is that the idea?" "No, sir. I cannot afford to employ so expensive a man as yourself, even if I was willing to continue you at the head of affairs, which, after the charges I have made against you, would hardly strike you as probable. The Argus must either reduce its running expenses or go under." "The most sensible thing for your mother to do would be to sell out," suggested Mr. Jebb, more than ever anxious that Squire Roach should get the paper, for he began to see the possibility that his plans might, after all, go astray. "That is where we differ, Mr. Jebb. I might inquire who is going to run this paper. I'm going to try to." "You? A boy?" And Mr. Jebb laughed sarcastically. "Come now, you're joking, aren't you?" "No, sir, I am not joking." "If you really mean that, all I have to say is this newspaper will be in the sheriff's hands in less than a month, and the squire will be able to bid it at a considerable saving over his present offer. We will not argue the matter, Mr. Jebb. As no good can come from prolonging this conversation, I will settle with you for your services to date." Frank Morris pulled a roll of money from his pocket and, peeling off sundry bills, pushed them toward Mr. Jebb together with a receipt which he requested him to sign. "All right," said the manager with a sneer. "I presume I am to consider myself discharged, is that it?" "You may consider your connection with the Argus as severed," said the boy calmly. "Oh, I'll be back again in a week or so," remarked Mr. Jebb carelessly, "just as soon as Squire Roach gets control." "I wouldn't rely too much on that idea," said Frank grimly. "I know what I'm talking about," said Mr. Jebb, rising to his feet and regarding the new manager of the Argus with a sarcastic smile. "Like all inexperienced boys, you have an expansive opinion of your own importance. You fancy it is easy to run a newspaper. You will transfer a few of your schoolboy compositions to be the columns of the Argus and column editorials. You will expect subscribers and advertisers to walk humbly into your office with the cash to pay your expenses. Oh, yes, I've met with a few of your kind before, college graduates, all that, who thought they knew it all. Well, go on, young man. Nothing like a little experience to knock the nonsense out of your shallow brains. I feel sorry for your mother, that's all. She doesn't look for your sympathy, Mr. Jebb. You've done your best to deprecate her property while she was paying you for your best services. If you call that a manly attitude toward an inexperienced woman who trusted you, I feel sorry for your sense of justice and honor. I'd hate to tell you what I think of you. I leave that to your own conscience, if you possess one." Mr. Jebb flushed to the roots of his hair. He could not disguise the fact from himself that he had acted a most contemptible part, but to be brought to task for his conduct by a mere boy made him angry. It seems to be the way of the world that we dislike those whom we have injured. "All right, young man," he gritted between his teeth. "He laughs best who laughs last. You twig my meaning? Good afternoon, my little editor. I wish you all the luck you deserve." And he strode toward the door after taking his hat from a hook on the wall. "Thank you, Mr. Jebb," said Frank smilingly. "At least you have made one sensible remark. All the luck I expect is what I shall deserve." But Mr. Jebb, with a sneering grunt, passed out into the main street and started to take a car for Squire Roach's residence. Frank then went to the door of the composing room and called in Mr. Robinson. "There's your money, Mr. Robinson. Please sign that receipt." "Thank you. I'm sorry, but I will have to dispense with your services after today." "What?" exclaimed Mr. Jebb's associate. "I won't be able to use you any longer," said Frank, looking squarely at him. "Oh, indeed," replied Robinson sarcastically. "I like that. Mr. Jebb hired me, and I stay here as long as Mr. Jebb says so. Understand?" And the reporter produced his cigarette box and took out a fresh coffin nail. "Mr. Jebb's connection with the Argus has already ceased." "Who says it has?" ejaculated Robinson flippantly. "I say so." "Oh, you don't count." "Don't I?" answered the boy cheerfully. "Just glance over that, please." And Frank handed him his mother's order, which established him in control of the Argus, commencing with that date. Mr. Robinson was somewhat taken aback. He certainly hadn't expected such a change in the aspect of affairs. "What did Mr. Jebb have to say to that?" he inquired uneasily. "I will have to refer you to Mr. Jebb for the answer." "You're mighty smart, aren't you?" said Robinson with a sneer. "I think that is all, Mr. Robinson," said the boy smoothly. "Oh, you do, eh? I think you're a stuck-up whippersnapper. Do you know that? I'm going to see Mr. Jebb about it," said Mr. Robinson, rising. "You're at liberty to do so," replied the boy. "The idea of a kid like you trying to lord it over a gentleman like me. Well, you won't last long here, that's a comfort. Squire Roach will own the Argus before the month is out, and Mr. Jebb and myself will be back in our old jobs." Mr. Robinson blew out a wreath of smoke as he walked nonchalantly out of the business office of the Argus. Billings was the next victim, and he took his discharge aggressively, like printers often do when they see a good thing slipping away from them. "Mr. Jebb brought me here from Chicago, and he promised me a steady job." Well, he gave it to you as long as he could. Has he left the office? Asked Billings in surprise. He is out of the Argus for good. He didn't tell me anything about it, said Billings in an injured tone. Who's going to run the composing room and set the jobs and advertisements? That needn't worry you, Mr. Billings. Say, are you the boss of this thing now? I am in full charge. Well, what's the matter with keeping me? I've got the lay of the office down fine, I have. If you'll keep me on, I'll work for $2 under the scale. How's that? Sorry, Mr. Billings, but this office, if it is small, is going to be run on union principles. A few dollars one way or the other won't make or break the Argus. As there is no union in this town, I shall recognize an international traveling card and pay the scale when I wish to employ a printer. By the way, Mr. Billings, you hold a card. I did once. I got hard up and ran out, admitted the man sheepishly. I thought so when you offered to work for less than the rate. Oh, a foreman doesn't have to have a card, said Billings glibly. Excuse me, but I think you'll find they do have to have one. Well, that's all, Mr. Billings. Ain't you going to pay my fare back to Chicago? No, sir. If Mr. Jebb made any such arrangement with you, you'll have to see him about it. Good day. Billings walked out very much disgruntled. Frank then paid off the rest of the hands and sent Billy Miggles over to the Times office with a note to Dan Harwood. End of Chapter 3.